I am Bruce Shapiro, Executive Director of the DART Center for Journalism and Trauma, a project of Columbia University Graduate School of Journalism, where you are. Welcome to the World Room and to the 29th Annual DART Awards for Excellence in Coverage of Trauma. It's been an amazing journey over 3 decades to get here, and I still kind of can't quite believe it. I have a couple of housekeeping notes, and then I'll say just a few things to set this evening up. We have a couple of speakers, a bit of ceremony, and then we'll get into the Winners Roundtable, which is the heart of this evening. This is one of my favorite nights of the year because I always learn so much from the astonishing colleagues who we're honoring here. First of all, the housekeeping. I want to very much acknowledge the DART Foundation of Mason, Michigan, and the Kenneth B. DART Foundation of Cayman Islands, who have been, for many years now, the key supporters, the anchor funders of the DART Center for Journalism and Trauma and of the DART Awards. Indeed, the DART Foundation established this award in 1994 and has remained our continuous funder since. Also in the housekeeping department, more mundanely, if you need restrooms, there is a women's room immediately out the door. There is an all-gender restroom halfway down the hall, and there is a men's room 2 flights down in the basement. Other interesting housekeeping. When we get to Q&A with our wonderful panelists, which will happen in a little while after some conversation, you can line up by the mics, and you should know that this entire event is being recorded by the J School and will be made available on the DART Center's webpage and YouTube page in due course. So that means that your questions will be recorded. Just know that. Don't say anything you wouldn't want your grandparents or your children to overhear. And finally, on your seats, you will notice these interesting business cards with a little QR code on them. These invite you to join the DART Center for Journalism and Trauma research list. One of our other projects are a whole host of studies into the experiences of journalists who cover traumatic events, trauma stories, who experience occupational health concerns as a result of this work. And this QR code simply allows you to put yourself on a list to find out when we're doing new studies that may contribute to the knowledge that we have about best practices in trauma reporting and best practices in newsroom duty of care. So if it interests you, click on the QR code and sign up. Again, I want to welcome you to this particular night. It is always a highlight of the DART Center's year because we get to go into such depth with extraordinary, innovative, ethical, imaginative journalists. Tonight, I can't help but say that I'm going to speak a bit more personally than usual. All of us here tonight know that we're here in the shadow of events of war crimes and escalating retaliation unfolding in Israel and Gaza, which has already left, I should say, 10 journalists dead and 2 missing. And for many of us, probably all of us in this room in one way or another, this is more than just another story. Some of us in this room will have grown up, or like my wife, had parents or grandparents who grew up amid colonial occupation, land theft, and the criminalization of national aspiration. Some of us will have, like my own grandparents, fled pogroms and mass murder. Some of us here were in this city when it was attacked 22 years ago, or had lives or families or communities here or far away upended by the wars which followed. The present tense reality of the news amidst which we are gathering, and these layers of private meaning collide in ways that can be evocative, disturbing, and bewildering. It's easy in the face of that to get trapped into doom scrolling, or to feel ourselves tighten into a fist, or to shut down entirely and turn away. The reporting that we are here to honor tonight offers us an alternative. Each of the journalists, each of the stories that you're going to meet is an act of refusal. These stories all refuse the siren song of dehumanization, which grants permission to perpetrators of atrocity, whether in the intimate sphere of childhood abuse and sexual violence, the shadow economy of human trafficking, or the public stage of war. These stories all refuse to either sensationalize violence or turn away from its reality. These stories all refuse silence and stigma in the lives of trauma survivors. All insist on the visibility, the dignity, and the complicated paths that individuals and families and communities follow in the wake of violence and crisis and tragedy. The DART Awards were established in 1994 with a generous grant from the W.A. and Claire Dart Foundation of Mason, Michigan, specifically to advance this kind of journalism. The awards today are a flagship program of the DART Center, which is still sustained by the DART Foundation and the Kenneth B. Dart Foundation. The DART Awards honor exceptional, innovative reporting that presents survivors with trauma and dignity, with insight and ethical commitment. And while you'll hear a lot about the stories, I want to tell you a little bit about the criteria and the process by which they were selected, because it really illuminates why we're all gathered here tonight. The DART Awards are judged every year by a unique interdisciplinary panel that includes faculty of this school, which includes practicing journalists, past DART Award winners, and others, which includes also the president-elect of the International Society for Traumatic Stress Studies. This year, Angela Nickerson of Australia, who can't be here tonight, but is one of the leading clinicians and researchers on the trauma landscape today. And they're asked to, and then there's a host of first-round judges and final judges who sort dozens and dozens of entries. And they're asked to apply some basic criteria, which I would ask you to reflect on as you hear from our journalists this evening and hear about the stories. All DART Award winners need to exhibit the highest standards of journalism excellence. We start there. They portray victims and survivors of trauma with sensitivity and insight. They must inform readers about the ways individuals react to and cope with emotional trauma. They must avoid sensationalism, melodrama, and the portrayal of victims as simply tragic or pathetic. Instead, they should emphasize victims' and survivors' experience rather than the traumatic event itself. Those criteria, with some minor modifications, have remained unchanged since 1994. And they represent, in many ways, not just criteria for judging some stories once a year, which is a wonderful carrot. The DART Center we don't do carrots and sticks, we do carrots and carrots approach to encouraging innovative ethical journalism. But, these criteria represent a set of professional and ethical and cultural commitments that we hope will steadily and have steadily improved the face of reporting, encouraged now 2 generations or more of journalists in profoundly ethical, profoundly compassionate, profoundly hard-hitting, effective reporting, which changes public conversation. You're going to hear from our winners tonight. You're also going to hear a little bit about each winning project in some wonderful video narrated by someone I also want to acknowledge here, our good friend and one of this year's DART Award judges, Sasha Pfeiffer, who is in the purple shirt there in the audience, the senior investigative correspondent and sometimes wonderfully welcome host for NPR's All Things Considered, and a key friend and ally of the DART Center for many years. We're going to hear now from a couple of people. We'll hear from Dean Jelani Cobb of this school and a couple of folks from the DART Foundation. And then we'll begin presenting the awards and then kind of get around to the roundtable itself. I would also tell you as you listen, those of you who are working journalists, those of you who are students in this school here, to know that the DART Awards are designed to do more than just bring happiness to a team of reporters who worked long and hard on a tough story, though that's really very good. We're very happy to do that. They are also designed to provide examples of how it can be done. And in many ways, the most important work that these stories do comes after this awards ceremony tonight, after the awards are announced, when we not only publish each winning story on the DART Center website, but publish tip sheets and interviews and backgrounders and these conversations going under the hood, as you all will be doing on the journey we're about to embark on, to pass lessons on to other reporters, other editors, other broadcasters in how it really can be done. I am going to turn the mic over for a few minutes now to my boss, the DART Center's boss, Dean Jelani Cobb of Columbia Journalism School. Jelani is a historian, a journalist, the founder of the Lippman Center for Reporting on Civil and Human Rights, based here at the school. And he also is someone for whom reporting on trauma, telling stories of trauma, is in his own bones, deeply in his own professional DNA. I said to some of our friends from the DART Foundation earlier today that when Jelani became dean 2 years ago, while we've always had wonderfully supportive relationships with the deans of this school, Jelani is the first dean whom I did not have to educate about what the DART Center does and why it's important. He's understood it in a deep and wonderfully supportive way. Jelani.
Thank you, Bruce. I'm happy to be here with you this evening. And just before we started, I was talking with Professor Shapiro about the turnout, and he was like, "Are people going to come? Are people going to come?" I was like, "It'll be fine. People are going to come." And now we had to actually go get more seating for people. So we're happy to see this level of support for the DART Awards. And I'll begin by saying that, well, first I want to acknowledge representatives from the DART Foundations. Because of their generosity, we're able to do the crucial work that we do here at the Journalism School and specifically in the DART Center. In addition, I want to thank our judges. I don't know how many of you are here. You raise your hands if you are one of the judges. Okay, so you see several people here. I had the experience, my first year here as a faculty member, I had the experience of being a judge for the DART Awards. And what it did was deepen my appreciation for the entries, the work of the journalists who won that year. But more fundamentally, it deepened my appreciation for the work of journalism, because every single person whose entry we evaluated had bravely and boldly confronted something difficult, something hard, in the service of a really noble ambition that we rarely speak out loud, which is that we do this work in the hope of no longer doing this work. And all the work that we do is in the interim. It's an ideal that if we educate people, if we inform people, if we show people what exactly is happening in the world, that we are conscientious enough. It's a faith in our humanity that we are conscientious enough to actually move in the direction of a better way for us to exist. Obviously, we're not here yet. As you made your way to campus, you likely heard the voices of protest that are in accord with the dynamics that we've seen in the world in the past week, and the trauma that has been unleashed in myriad directions that will unfold over years to come. And we will be there to chronicle what has happened now, in this moment, and the after effects of it in a year, in a decade, until we no longer have to do this work. So I want to say thank you to everyone who has come out. I want to say thank you to everyone from the Boston Globe, the Milwaukee Journal, Sentinel, ProPublica, the New York Times, Spotify, and the Washington Post who are here with us this evening. And in a bigger sense, I want to say thank you to all of us who subscribe to that idealistic notion that we will do this work until we no longer have to do this work. Thank you.
I now want to introduce someone else who's been a critical friend and ally from the Dart Center, for the Dart Center, since before the beginning, since the inception of the Dart Awards in 1994. These awards, by the way, existed before there was a Dart Center, so we're into deep history here. And that's Jim Lammers. Jim is the board chair of Dart Container Corporation, but he's here tonight as the president of the board of the Dart Foundation. Jim has been a key ally, friend, and guiding spirit and partner, really, who has been in such accord with the mission and work for the Dart Center all these years. And every year, it's always such a pleasure to introduce him, to say a few things. Jim, you're on.
Bruce, I want to thank you for the introduction. It's wonderful to be here this evening. As Bruce was talking, as many of us have probably experienced, when you're second, third, or fourth to speak, you start looking at your comments and say, well, he said that, he said that, he said that. So at any rate, sometimes it's fine to sound the same themes. In this case, I think it is, because they're important ones. So I do want to begin, Bruce, by thanking you for your long and very steady and effective leadership of the Dart Center, and to you, Jelani, for your interest in and support of the Dart Center. And I also want to thank all the members of the Dart Center staff and the many friends of the Dart Center who are here tonight and may be listening from afar. Albeit from a funding perspective, I've had the pleasure of being involved from the beginning. And the seeds of the Dart Center were planted at Michigan State University. They began to sprout at the University of Washington in Seattle. And since 2009, they have blossomed here at the Columbia School of Journalism, which has been its home. And over the last 30 years, I think the Dart Center has grown its programs, its reach, its impact, and is very rightfully recognized as the leader in the journalism and trauma space. And as was announced earlier this fall, the Dart Center will be launching a documentary Filmmakers program, which I'm sure will contribute very positively to the great work that's already being done on so many fronts. The DART Center exists because traumatic events, whether writ small or large, from domestic violence to human trafficking to institutional abuse and to full-scale war, profoundly impact victims' lives, the journalists who report on these events, and the communities in which they occur. The reporting for which tonight's honorees, the Washington Post, Spotify, the New York Times, the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel, and ProPublica, are being acknowledged and celebrated. They address these impacts with great care, thoughtfulness, and thoroughness. And it is the result of the collaborative team efforts, and that's one of the things that I think is a real hallmark of the DART Awards, that these things happen. And these are teams that are comprised of reporters, photographers, producers, fact checkers, mix engineers, composers, and the list goes on. So on behalf of all of the people who benefited from your storytelling and your craft, I thank you for setting such powerful examples of how to do it right and get it right. And I add my voice to the chorus of people singing your praises. Tonight's roundtable discussion, I'm very much looking forward to hearing more from the winners about the processes they employed and the obstacles they faced, and surely they did face obstacles during the course of their reporting. So in closing, I thank all of you for the very difficult work you do. It is important, and it does matter.
Thank you, Jim. As Jim mentioned, it is important, as we hear more about the winners, to recognize that this always has been a team prize, and there's a reason for that. The feeling of the DART Center has always been that telling stories about the most difficult human experiences, stories of cruelty and violence, of recovery and suffering, requires more than just great reporting. It really does require attention to images, attention to design, meticulous, careful editing. It's not just a kind of an accident that this is a team prize. Our view is that the extraordinary commitment that it takes to do trauma reporting is a newsroom-wide commitment. And that's why every year there is such a huge range of news organizations which win the DART Awards. This year we have local and national newsrooms across media platforms. Some years it has been very small local newspapers alongside some of the largest media organizations. It's because what counts is that collaborative effort to tell these extraordinary stories well. We're now going to begin hearing a bit about each honoree tonight. And I should say there's several categories of honorees. We're going to begin with a special citation. We'll hear about honorable mentions and 2 DART Award winners. This is the last time I'm going to mention these categories. They are here because it's always an incredibly tough and difficult job, and all of these are some of the greatest works of journalism you will ever hear. We're going to do a brief video clip for each presentation, and then Jim, along with our good friend Jackie Doak, are going to present, or is it just Jim, you and me? I'm not sure. Forget it. 3, no, yeah, 4. Yes, we're going to present little plaques to the winners who deserve so much more than that. And again, you're going to hear the disembodied voice of our good friend Sasha Pfeiffer introducing this. We're going to begin with something we've never done in quite this way before, a special citation to the Washington Post for its ongoing coverage of gun violence in America, and in particular, the impact of gun violence on children. The Washington Post team will be represented here tonight by reporter John Woodrow Cox.
The Washington Post received a special citation for its ongoing reporting on gun violence in the United States, specifically its impact on children. We are in a unique period of pervasive and escalating gun violence. So the jury recognized the sustained commitment of the Post and Enterprise reporter John Woodrow Cox for innovative, in-depth reporting on the impact of gun violence on children, families, and communities. It's an issue that has become more urgent and more traumatic as our country becomes more soaked in guns and more politically divided. The general public feels considerable fatigue and helplessness about this, but the jury commended Cox for his unrelenting focus and his masterful ability to find new and illuminating angles on this issue. Jurors praised him for his deep sensitivity, compassion, and unparalleled body of work that serves as a model for reporters and news organizations across the country.
John, come and say a few words. Say a few words and then...
Sorry. I have dad brain. We have a 10-week-old back there. This organization has meant so much to me for so many years. I was honored here in 2018 and was really introduced to this place. And it has really, it's not just been a place that, has celebrated some of my work. It's a place that's really shaped the work that I've done since, both in encouraging it to continue, but in teaching me on how to do it. Every year at the end of this, I've covered how children are impacted by gun violence for a long time. And at the end of every year, I think, well, that's it. I've done everything that I can. I've said what I have to say. And then I just have kept going. And I'm saying again that I think I'm at the end, but I don't know. I might not be. But, as my wife said to me, Jen, before I came up here, what the DART organization, the DART Center, has meant to us as a family and how well you've taken care of us and supported this work and supported so much work that I admire. Because as has been said repeatedly tonight, this is people taking on really difficult subjects in the hope that we'll be out of a job one day. So I'm just enormously honored to be here and that I got choked up seeing those children. Honestly, this is just an incredible honor. So thank you all for being here.
Next, we're going to start with an honorable mention, which went to Gimlet, a Spotify studio represented by its host and managing editor, Connie Walker, for Surviving St. Michael's, remarkable podcast.
Last year, my brother Hal told me a story about our late dad. I'd never heard it before, and now I can't let it go.
What was his mood when he was telling you that?
No regrets, no remorse for what he had done.
In the 1970s, my dad was a police officer in rural Saskatchewan. One night, while out on patrol, he saw a car swerving on the road and he pulled it over. When he walked up to the window, he recognized the man behind the wheel.
As being one of the priests that, and he said, one of the priests that abused him in residential school. And he ended up taking him out of the vehicle and beating the shit out of him.
This story brought me home to a mystery in my own family that I need to solve.
Did he tell you who the priest was or anything about him?
No, he didn't know.
I've never heard him mention names, but I knew he had stories.
I think I know who it is, but I'm not going to say it on this thing.
My search for answers has led me to the St. Michael's Indian Residential School,
That first day I stepped into that residential school, my childhood was gone.
Gimlet, a Spotify studio, received an honorable mention for episodes 3 and 4 of Stolen: Surviving St. Michael's. This podcast investigates how abuse at a government-funded residential school in Canada, run by the Catholic Church, scarred generations of Indigenous people. Those affected include the family of journalist Connie Walker. Judges called the work a remarkably moving masterpiece and a testament to the power of audio. They praised Walker's wisdom and grace for letting the story tell itself and for allowing survivors the space and dignity to tell their own stories, both the horror and moments of strength and reflection. They also commended Walker for maintaining a spotlight on the effects of colonialism and trauma and showing how its lasting effects reverberate through generations of colonized people.
It really is an honor to be here tonight. This recognition is really incredible for me because of the time I've been able to spend here at the Dart Center as an Ockberg Fellow in 2019. That was personally and professionally a transformative time for me. I learned about how to be more trauma-informed in my reporting, how to help take care of myself and my team when doing this kind of work. But I think what was unexpected for me about that week was that I also learned about the power of storytelling to help heal from trauma. And that was a revelation that is really foundational to the work that's being recognized here tonight. Because although it was a rigorously reported investigation into the widespread abuse at a single residential school in Canada, it was also a personal story for me, a story about my father, about his abuse at that school, about my family and the reverberations of that abuse through generations. And along with my team, I just feel so grateful that we were supported to help tell this story, and that personally I was supported to help feel the power of healing through being able to tell our own story. So I just want to thank the Dart Center for this incredible work that you all do every day, for the work that you're doing to support journalists and to help empower us to do this difficult but really important work. So thank you so much for this. I appreciate it.
The next honorable mention goes to the New York Times team, represented by Meg Shutzer and Rachel Mueller, for Dying Inside: Chaos and Cruelty in Louisiana Juvenile Detention.
It's hard to make sense of what happened at the Ware Youth Center last month. 2 teens being held at the detention center hanged themselves to death within 72 hours back in February. Jordan Bachman was 17 years old and Solon Peterson had just turned 13.
My kid didn't deserve to die because he set a fire to a roll of toilet paper in a school.
They need to close that facility down. They need to close it down.
Everything that could have gone wrong went wrong in this situation.
The New York Times received an honorable mention for Dying Inside: Chaos and Cruelty in Louisiana Juvenile Detention. This investigation reveals repeated abuses, overlooked complaints, and a surge in suicide attempts at a Louisiana detention center with powerful political allies. Judges described it as an incredible, daring feat of investigative journalism that was layered and scaffolded perfectly to let you see the tragic evidence for yourself. They praised Megan Shutzer and Rachel Lauren Mueller for their devotion of time to sources, their impeccable research, and their sensitive exploration of different types of trauma, from suicide and rape to child sexual abuse. They called the project's impact phenomenal and noted that it sent shockwaves through the community. Its impact included breaking the dam of inaction and exposing the interlocking self-interest that perpetuates trauma.
Hello, everybody. Thank you all for being here tonight. I'm Rachel, up here with my colleague, Meg. And I just feel really honored to be around such incredible company. I'm like pretty starstruck by a lot of faces in this room, and also just feel very humble. Reporting on trauma feels particularly important to me, and I know that we worked really hard in the ways that we navigated this. So this award in particular feels impactful, and I just wrote a few other things down. I'm feeling a little bit nervous. With all of these stories, it's difficult to engage with them without feeling the magnitude of the grief and the trauma that our subjects and their families have endured. For our project, for 3 years, we stood beside them and invested in their past experiences, but also in their futures. We know that trauma has no off switch, but what we hope is that throughout the process of our work, we're able to offer some sense of peace and healing while also bringing really important stories into the world. The existence of this award itself is an important acknowledgement of the significance and the weight that this kind of difficult work carries. To be honored here today by the Dart Center is just beyond anything we expected and means the world to us. A few thanks to the investigative reporting program at UC Berkeley for seeing the potential in this story right from the very beginning. The New York Times, who trusted some very green journalists on a really challenging story. Our friends and family who supported us when we ourselves were really struggling at different points. And of course, for all those who shared little pieces of their lives with us to get this told. We're so grateful. Thank you all.
Okay. Next, we're going to hear a bit about our first DART Award winner of the evening, the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel and ProPublica, for The Landlord and the Tenant, represented by reporters Raquel, Rutledge, and Ken Armstrong.
The Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel and ProPublica received the DART Award for The Landlord and the Tenant. This story uses side-by-side portraiture to highlight the criminal justice system's indefensible preconceptions and the life-altering failures of the social safety net. Judges described the piece as Dickensian in its depth, range, and storytelling power. They called it a gripping account of how two people are treated so vastly differently by the law. They commended the reporting team for offering a comprehensive, complex, nuanced tale that integrates intergenerational trauma, longitudinal systemic failures, and best intentions gone awry. Judges said the brilliance of the piece is in the details. They call the level of reporting required incredibly difficult, and the writing both dispassionate and uniquely powerful. They praised Raquel Rutledge and Ken Armstrong for providing a master class in not only urban reporting, but systemic reporting around trauma and injustice.
Hi, I'm Ken. This is Raquel. Thank you, Bruce, and our thanks to the Dart Center for all you do to lift up journalism and to help us do our jobs better. Whenever I've had questions about trauma, the first place I've turned to has always been the Dart Center, and it's been that way for years, many years. I can't remember the first time I called up Bruce and asked for help, but it was a long time ago. Credit for this award really goes to the work that Raquel did in this case. The way in which she approached Angelica Belen, the tenant in our story, and then the way she communicated with her throughout, it was just a model of care, of being open-hearted, and of wishing to understand rather than wanting to judge. Credit too goes to our editors. Too many to name. There are always too many editors to name. But they were open-minded, and they let us do this story, and they let us do it in the way that we felt would do it the greatest justice. I'm really grateful that we got a chance to go back and revisit Angelica Belen's life and to tell a fuller, more complicated story. And I'm really thankful that Raquel invited me to take part in telling it. So, thank you.
All right. Next, we're going to recognize our final award winner of the evening, the Boston Globe for Kate Price Remembers Something Terrible, represented by reporter Janelle Nanos and video producer and editor Andrea Patino Contreras.
My very first memory is of my father abusing me in the back of his mother's boyfriend's bar. I remember feeling shattered after my world had just changed and something major had just happened and everybody was acting like nothing had happened. My father trafficked me, sexually physically abused me, that my grandfather abused. My mother looked the other way. These are very serious allegations.
The Boston Globe received the Dart Award for Kate Price Remembers Something Terrible. It tells the story of an authority on child sex trafficking who spent decades trying to understand whether the unthinkable happened to her too. Judges described the piece as remarkable, revelatory journalism that addresses the complicated nature of memory with great depth, care, and wisdom. They noted how both journalist Janelle Nanos and survivor Kate Price are in pursuit of the same end goal, truth. Jurors called it an immensely empathetic, unflinching, and intelligent piece of journalism. They also praised the beautiful video and other multimedia elements, as well as the paper's dedication to the verification process. And they praised Nanos for her enormous commitment of time, of effort, of passion, and for achieving a level of reporting, commitment, and depth that transcended drama and pathos in real tragedy.
Thank you so much to everyone affiliated with the Dart Center, everyone who's spoken tonight. I am overwhelmed to be here. I never thought that when I met Kay Price in 2012 that I would be standing here tonight, certainly. I never thought I would spend 10 years on a story. But Kate always knew. I was, in her words, her person. And she trusted me to bear witness to her trauma and her search for answers. And when I met her sister, Carrie, she immediately did the same. I remain in awe of them both. Anyone in this industry knows what a rare and enormous gift it is to be able to tell these stories. I was fortunate in that I had an extraordinary team to help me tell it. My editors on this project, Scott Allen, Francis Storrs, were geniuses. Erin Clark, who made the gorgeous photos. Andrea, who just made the documentary so brilliant. John Hancock, who built a world of its own on the web, and Amy Padula, who knew all the reporting was in the tape and brought it to life. My friends and my amazing husband, who have been with me for this 10-year journey. The Globe's editor, who knew the risks that we took to tell this story and who believed in it, and who made it happen. And it's that belief in this story and in me that really is what the whole story is ultimately about. It is the power of being believed. So thank you to the Dart Center for this extraordinary honor. This means a tremendous amount to me to be recognized here, considering the work that you do. So thank you.
Another round of applause for all of our winners tonight. We're going to take a very short break, just a couple minutes, while those who are panelists tonight migrate up to the front of the room. If you need to grab some more nourishment, please do so. And we're going to transition from here into the heart of this evening, which is a conversation about how these remarkable stories came to be. This is a really special opportunity to hear a little more about how such extraordinary journalism comes to be. What we'll do is I'll ask a couple of rounds of questions of everyone, and then we'll go to the mics and the mic. And I invite any of you who are here, and especially those of you who are students in this school, to come up and ask questions about how these stories came to be. And I would just in advance say, as you think about that, think about your questions as questions, not statements. Remember that there are probably going to be a bunch of people who want to ask stuff, and we want to give them all an opportunity to do so. So first, could we get one more round of applause for all the winners who are up here and in the audience? Also, before the evening gets too long, I want to thank the Dart Center team, Ariel Richin, who put the videos together and mostly made them work, Kate Black, Crystal Groh, who is out with COVID and not here, Zan Strumfeld, Alana Newman, who are all here. Thank you all for making this possible. There's one common thread beyond the general notion of trauma in all of this year's winners. It is coincidental and yet also profound, which is that in one way or another, each of these stories each of the stories we're recognizing tonight and that we've just heard about are centered in very powerful ways on children, on the experiences of children with violence, sometimes to the cost of their lives, sometimes extending in haunted memory into adulthood, sometimes extending across generations, sometimes radiating out into the lives of communities. All of you are and this really was not something the judges or we planned. It's the way the cards fell, and yet it does say something, I think, about the time we're in, something as well about the challenges that reporters face and the urgent need to find ways to talk about the worst things that happen to children and to interrogate children themselves, to interrogate memories of childhood, to think about how to put that into journalism, which is not something that most of us as reporters ever gave much attention to, right? So I want to start out by asking each of you one thing, which is that as you think back on your work, on your various stories, or in John's case, your whole kind of body of work, is there one way that you're, or one principal way in which you're reporting on childhood, or you're thinking about childhood as a zone for reporting or a place to begin reporting has changed? What would you like other journalists to know about the challenges of telling stories that involve young children? And I think, Raquel, maybe I'll start with you, both of you two.
Gosh, I mean, to talk about how it's changed, I mean, I think this
how did the story change you when you were thinking about where kids and news fit in and how you report them?
Yeah, I mean, that's a difficult question. Our story really revolved around a young mom with the 3 children who burned in the fire. And I mean, the reason that I was so compelled actually was photography that brought me into that story. Do you remember the picture, the last picture on that video of Angelica Belen in the courtroom and just the look on her face? That was in 2013. So talking about 10 years later, like you spent 10 years, I thought about that picture for 10 years and what happened in that fire. And so I always wanted to go back to it. It was something I knew I wanted to do. But I guess in terms of like covering children, I mean, that's,
it struck me also that you cast back into her childhood as well, and the way in which these kind of different generations of childhood found their way into your story.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that was so important. And this is where I called on Ken to help me, because I knew this was not a conventional investigation. I've been doing investigations for a long time, and this was something different, very different, and I wanted to tell it in a different way. And I knew that he was the one person on the planet that could help me figure out how to do this. Like, how are we going to tell this? And so it was brilliant on his part, because I wanted to tell that story. I wanted to start that story initially with the scene of Angelica Belen locking her children in the room. I mean, because to me that was the most compelling thing. It's like she's preparing for her day, she's getting ready to go to work, and here's what she did. She hugged the kids and she said, "I'm going to be back and we're going to have spaghetti for dinner." And it was so gripping, and I wanted to tell that. Like, I thought that would be a good intro. And Ken, in his brilliance, he's like, no, we need to like understand her first. We need to know her childhood. We need to know where she's been. Speaking of her childhood, like how important that was in that decision making to leaving those kids alone. She had been left alone in her life, and to her nothing happened. I mean, she was left alone many, many times, and those were some of the best times of her life because she had been so abused. And so understanding how she got there, I think, was so important for the reader. So I just thank you to Ken for helping structure that way.
Mm-hmm. Megan, kids in detention, not an easy subject. First of all, there are layers and layers and layers of confidentiality around juvenile courts and juvenile offenders and all kinds of things. Secondly, there are enormous social prejudices. I mean, I remember when I was doing a lot of criminal justice reporting, the language at that point around juvenile offenders were super predators and a generational wolf pack, and I think lots of folks still make presumptions about who's in juvenile lockup. You're telling a different story, and you have to not only report that out, but then build a bridge to a readership that may not see things your way. Talk about that, how you've thought about kids and how this story maybe changed your work.
Well, you're absolutely right. Reporting on young people in juvenile detention, it's really difficult to get access, and for several reasons in terms of confidentiality being one of them. But I think for us, when we found out that these 2 boys died in this detention center over the course of one weekend, it was just one of those moments where you need to understand what could have happened in this place to allow that to happen. And at first, what we did was try to find access to people who had been there before, because again, it's really hard to talk to people who were in this facility at the time. And I think for us, we came in with an open mind, ready to listen to the full story that these young people, and mostly young women, wanted to share with us. It took a long time before we built their trust, and then to go from there to think about the trust of anyone reading this article. I think it became just this cumulative process of, the echoes of what we were hearing from so many young people who had experienced the same kinds of abuse in this facility, I think was part of how we had to then translate just one story to a broader audience.
How did you go about building trust with kids who've been so abused and betrayed by everybody in the system? It's hard enough to build trust with teenagers under the best circumstances, or younger children under the best of circumstances. How did you go about that?
I think one of the things that was really upsetting and distressing was that many of the people that we talked to had never spoken about what had happened to them at this facility, not even to family members. And so, no, we didn't just come in and immediately start asking them really hard questions, but we did find that after time and after building relationships with people that they're talking about this sometimes for the first time was something that they really wanted to do, that was again, this processing of trauma that they were going through, that we were going through next to them in many of these cases. And we interviewed, I think, over 40 young people that had experienced sexual abuse or physical abuse at this facility. So it was so many people, and most of those had never talked about it before. So I think, yes, there was the trust building, and then there was almost this sense of relief of someone believes me and it wants to hear from me. And that was actually one of the most surprising parts of it.
I just want to poke at that one more time, because so many I find many of our students here at Columbia Journalism School, as they begin reporting, are anxious about talking to young people or anybody else about such severe trauma, fear of re-traumatizing, fear of provoking the worst emotions that people have, and destabilizing people further. What kind of practices did you follow to minimize harm and maximize help to these kids?
Sure, absolutely. I think from the beginning, we tried to have as much transparency as we could with where this was going. We were graduate students at J School across the country, and so we didn't know that this would be in the New York Times, but we started with trying to share, this is who we are, this is what we're trying to do, and explaining our efforts really just to understand this facility as a whole. Often we spoke to young people trying to understand, what was your schedule like at this place? What were, when did you have meals? Where did you stay? Kind of trying to understand the bigger picture, and not asking people to go deep into their personal stories unless that was something that they wanted to and felt comfortable with. So I think it was a very tentative and slow process of talking about many things before getting into people's personal stories, and then again moving very slowly into the personal. We were also working on a documentary, and so there was this balance between what do we feel comfortable talking about just face to face, and then well, do you want there to be a camera in the room, which changes everything? And so I think the relationship building and the slowness and the trepidation, I think, was part of it. And then also doing our best to connect the young people that we interviewed with the resources that we were familiar with in Louisiana, and trying to find ways that whether or not they wanted to share anything with us, that they knew as much as we knew of where they could go for support.
What I should say, for those of you who are not living within the world of journalism all the time, one of the most exciting developments and innovations in journalism in the last decade have been collaborations between journalism schools like Berkeley, like Columbia, like others, and investigative centers, major news organizations like the New York Times. It's been a powerful way, both of it, extending the experience and energy of students and adding force to often understaffed and depleted newsrooms. It's resulted in some extraordinary work.
I just want to say one more thing. I think, to your question, though, we were honestly terrified that we were creating that harm. And we were going to the Dart Center, we were going to our professors, and I think we still worry about that. And so I tried to answer your question with our best practices, but the reality is I think that was a huge concern throughout, and continues to be as a story comes out into the world, and someone who had buried something for a long time has to deal with the consequences of that.
Yeah. Janelle, you explored childhood through the long lens of memory, right? At one point, you, I think, described Kate Price as the archaeologist of her own memory, right? So you're looking back at how childhood is remembered, how childhood abuse and exploitation and trafficking are remembered. What did you come away with in thinking about how to report on that?
Just how extraordinary our brains are at protecting ourselves. I think when it comes to childhood trauma, particularly childhood trauma that falls into the category of betrayal trauma, where the person who is supposed to be your caregiver is the one harming you most, and you need to have a relationship with them in order to survive, and yet that relationship is destroying you in the process. What the brain does in terms of your capacity to survive that and then to block that. A lot of victims of severe childhood sexual abuse dissociate and have dissociative disorders, and it's only really into their 20s or 30s that they can fully kind of get to a place where they understand the abuse that happened to them, and that was Kate's story. And so it's in part because you're a child and you don't know that the thing that's happening to you is wrong until you're an adult and you realize it. It's also because some of the worst things go into the recesses of your memory. And so for Kate, when those memories revealed themselves again, and she relived through that trauma, and then had these pieces of her life that she wanted to fit back together, it's layers. It's the childhood you thought you had, and then it's the childhood that's revealed to you. And so telling that story means revealing both to the reader, but also explaining that complexity and having to say, this is how memory works, this is how trauma works in the brain. Like, there's a lot of layers here. Yeah. And so I think for the sake of the reader, I was always kind of trying to anticipate where they were thinking, where their questions were arising. How could she possibly remember something from when she was 3? How could she possibly forget? Yeah. And so being able to explain that complexity, I think, was really at the heart of the story.
Yeah. I mean, we may talk more about that in a few minutes. It's a really unusual way that this story is structured. Connie, when you and I first met a few years ago, you had been reporting a lot on First Nations children and women and on victimization. But here you've gone at it, A, in even greater depth, and B, done it through the lens of your own family. What did you think you understood going into this project that you've come out the other side thinking about differently, or reporting on differently, or that you'll carry differently to the next project?
I think that like in terms of like understanding the impacts of residential schools in Canada was something that, as a reporter in Canada for 20 years, I thought I understood quite a lot. But it really was hearing that story about my dad and about the fact that he had been abused at a residential school that really was surprisingly, or maybe not surprisingly, like one of the first times I thought about like how this had impacted me and my family and my father, and I think that was the kind of spark that then made me actually what I learned through like my time at the Dart Center and then the work I did after that in like trauma specific therapy was like the power in shining a light, the power in exposing it, that so much time and energy is spent of trying to avoid something that is absolutely unavoidable, and that I had learned like that it was actually a relief to talk about it, a relief to shine a light, to learn more. And so I wanted that approach with this story as well. And I think what I came away with was something I never could have imagined in terms of like what we were able to uncover about the scale of abuse at a single school, the number of people like that we spoke to as survivors of this residential school, but then the number of allegations we were able to uncover through lawsuits and court documents was just staggering, and something I think I'm still processing, honestly, because what came with it was then hearing from the people who are now still being affected, because those children who were abused at that residential school went home, and this cycle continued and continued and continues today. And so I feel like that is something that I think, we've had a truth and reconciliation process in Canada, but I think we're still really at the beginning stages of understanding the truth.
Mm-hmm. John, I should say John Woodrow Cox has already very generously done a ton of tip sheets and videos and other things for the Dart Center talking about his strategies for interviewing children and reporting on children. So I'm not going to ask you to regurgitate those. But one thing that struck me looking at the body of your work, for which the judges awarded you this special citation at this time of overwhelming gun violence in our country, is that on the one hand, you do describe the huge vulnerability and damage to children's lives, including those at a very young age who most of us as reporters wouldn't even begin to think about reporting on. You do that, but you're not only portraying pathology, you're not portraying a doomed generation. You are also portraying a lot of resilience, to use a perhaps hackneyed at this point word. You're showing children as full human beings who cope. How did you do that? How as a storytelling matter, it's very difficult even with adults to describe contradictory and complex outcomes, or to avoid turning people either into trauma cliches or Hallmark Hall of Fame closure cliches. How do you approach that? And how do you think, I should say, how do you think about where trauma and resilience in children fit together now?
I think time is the most important tool that we have, right, as reporters, and this is a message for editors and news organizations.
There are a few in the room.
To portray someone in full, it takes time. And, I think about, I basically lived in Uvalde for last summer, and, the little girl, Caitlin Gonzalez, who was the center of that story, is a great example of many things. And that in particular, I was there the first time I met her. It was just to sort of get to know me. I just wanted to make her comfortable, and she insisted on telling me the story of that day. And I was there for 3 hours, and then at the end of that, she said, I'm going to take you to the cemetery, because she wanted to give me a tour of her friends' so I was there for that. But then I was also there when she, it started raining, and incredibly, that's like the hottest place I've ever been. And it started raining. She wanted to go do cartwheels, in the rain. And then I was also there when she's sitting on the couch and just starts watching videos of other survivors of school shootings and knows every detail of every kid because she's watched them over and over and over again, right? But all of those were the result of just being there. And then being willing. I think there can be a tendency, especially maybe early in your career, to sort of lean into the horror, right? And lean into, let me surface the trauma, right? When in fact, that's not real, and it won't read real to a reader, because a 10-year-old is still a 10-year-old, right? She's still at the end of, giving this incredible speech. Like, really all she wants is to go get a couple of stuffed animals and then go get, a snow cone, right? So, I think that it's that sort of simple of reporting and reporting and reporting and reporting, and then realizing that, the weight of someone's trauma and the way you deliver it to the reader is made much more powerful if you've delivered a person in full. And, almost every kid who I've written about through the years has that part of them, right? And I see hope. There hasn't been a child that I haven't seen hope in, not one. And, I think about, when I was here last time in 2017, I'd written about a little girl in Townville, South Carolina, who was the most damaged person that I'd ever written about. She didn't go to school for 6 years. She went back to school last year. So I got to go back and tell this story about her, and she had a little crush on a boy, and she was doing great. She was making A's, right? And so this was, to me, it was like, if anyone sort of could have felt hopeless, it was that family. And here she was.
Yeah. I'm going to ask one more quick round of questions, and then we'll go to the room. So you may want to line up at the mic and be thinking about what you want to ask. Janelle, I think I'm going to start with you on this one. In talking to Kate Price, as you were saying a few minutes ago, you do this kind of interesting balancing act between believing, trusting in memory, but also situating it, having to challenge it, and situating it within trauma science and neuroscience and other fields that sometimes have cast a very skeptical eye on recovered memory and on fragmentary memory and the reliability of long past trauma memory. How did you, what made you go in that direction in the first place? Because there's actually a lot of science. B, I presume you don't have a degree in neuroscience, so how did you educate yourself? How did you educate yourself to the point where you were comfortable doing this, deciding who to listen to, and so on? Yeah. And in a writing way, how did you balance it? That's a lot. Give a relatively quick answer, but it's like.
So I don't have I'm not a neuroscientist, which, that might be my next career path, but no. But there are a lot of them in Boston. And there are a lot of people, Boston, so somebody told me the other day that that Boston to trauma is like Vienna was to the Romantics. Like Boston has this just nexus of trauma specialists. One of them is Bessel van der Kolk, who wrote The Body Keeps the Score and was Kate's therapist. And so I talked to Bessel. There were people who were willing to help me tell the story because they'd watched the memory wars unfold during the 90s when victims came forward about their abuse and were just pushed aside and told those are not true. And they wanted to write that story, like correct that story, not write it. I was the one writing it, but they wanted that truth out there that this can happen. And so, but again, like I had to report it, but then I had to also tell my editors, right? And so, I will say, like there's a wonderful therapist in Boston Jim Hopper, who's an expert in traumatic memory, who got on a Zoom call with the Globe editor, my editor, our attorney, and talked through the process of this is how recovered memory works, because we all wanted to make sure we got it right. And there was a lot at stake. So for me, it was really such a tremendous part of Kate's story that I knew that it had to be a big part of the story itself, too.
All right. Yeah, thanks. Raquel, you and Ken told this story of two very different lives of Todd Brenner, the landlord, and Angelica and her kids and her own past. And what struck me in rereading it today is that in a way that's different from most of the investigative stories I see now, it's a small story. That is to say, it's about two very particular people. Most investigative reporting that we see now are big system stories with huge agglomerations of data showing systemic discrimination and or systemic collapses and failures, and which is enormously important reporting, and it's the kind of stuff I did. But this is a story of one slumlord, a story of one mother, one horrific tragedy, and where each one of these went into the legal system. How did you two come to see this as having epic reporting possibilities, as really being a pathway into something so far-reaching and important that says something about our society, yet does it without the usual data sets, and it's about the particulars?
Yeah, I mean, that was our concern from the outset, was the challenge of we didn't have a nut graph. And we knew our editors at ProPublica and the Journal Sentinel are heavy on the nut graph, and what are the investigative findings and how's that going to go? But we were trusting our readers. I mean, we really thought that if we could tell these stories in this braided narrative way, that we trusted the readers to see where the systems were failing. We were just using the facts, minimal facts, to just show what happened, and you could see the various systems that failed along the way. And so it was a leap of faith, and we had the discussion with our editors, and they didn't balk at that. They read it and could see it. So we were hopeful that readers would also follow along and see it that way. So it was deliberate to not have a nut graph.
Yeah. But it's unusual, right? And
yes.
and lesson students here, not every story needs a nut graph. Don't say that to your professors. But it's true. And actually, Megan, that leads me to a question for you about the writing of this story. It's very hard in United Statesian society at the moment to get people to pay attention to stories about prison. It's even harder to get people to pay attention to stories about juvenile offenders, let alone systemic exposures of abuse in a state that people also don't want to hear a lot about, Louisiana. How did you think about the writing of this? How did you think about writing and presenting, in its various multimedia ways too, a story that could draw readers into this very difficult institution that most people want to think about, very difficult offenses that people don't want to think about, and abuse of children? How'd you think about that?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and our story was really long too, so it was like heavy and a very difficult topic and long. And I think we knew that the individual stories we had heard were really powerful, and at the same time we wanted, I think our sort of like, one of the things that was part of our inner compass throughout this was both like looking at these individual stories, but then also looking at the systems and really making sure that, in a different way, but like making sure that we were weaving the two together. And so I think the way that we hope to get people into the actual storytelling that we thought was really powerful was just with the numbers and the sheer just astonishing numbers of children that were attempting to end their lives in this facility, because that's just, when you see that many kids trying to find any way out, even through suicide, you know that something is wrong, and then that numbers into the actual broader story. So I'm not sure that that is like a deeply exciting entry point, but I think it was really what we felt like was the most important sort of top thing that you needed to know about why you should pay attention to this place.
Why you should pay attention to this. You don't always need a nut graft, but you do always need to make a case for why you should pay attention to this, right? Connie, you did something that would daunt most of the most seasoned investigative reporters I know, which is to apply your investigative reporting skills to your own family. We sometimes in our classes here, or even in newsrooms, we will have conversations about, well, who is entitled to report on their own community or their own identity group versus who's an outsider. I have actually find myself saying sometimes, no matter how much you identify with the community, try applying your own reporting skills to your own family and see where the lines get drawn. What was that like for you? What went well and what was really challenging about reporting out a family story?
I mean, it was really difficult. Like, I still am worried about it. It's been out for a while, just because it's so deeply sensitive, and because so many of the people in my family that we were talking to were survivors of this residential school, and that's part of what we were talking to them about. And these were, again, not conversations that we ever had before, but there was something about having a microphone that seemed to like give us permission to talk about it in a way that was interesting, and I felt like even though they were really difficult conversations often, they were also good conversations. Like we felt good after. They were also filled with laughter and and for me, because of my relationship with my father and the estrangement, like it was a chance to reconnect, which I think was I'm so grateful for. But I think that the other, like, just from a journalism point of view, like, because I was so close to it, I really had a lot of difficulty editorially, like, understanding. I was like after the first reporting trip, I remember coming back and I had done these interviews with my family members. And I was like, to the team, I was like, I'm really into this 2-hour interview with my Auntie Margaret, but do you guys is this a story? Is this a thing? And I really had no gauge, and I think that the really only way that it was possible to do this work was because we had such an incredible team, and because I had so much editorial support to do that. And that's something that's a privilege in this day and age in journalism, and something that I'm just so grateful for.
Was there ever a time when you felt an impulse to self-censor because it was a family story where your team had to talk you into continuing on?
No, I don't feel like. I feel like part of the thing was around the agency, that I was leading where I was comfortable going, which was, I think, so important in terms of having it be a positive experience. I think that there was always a question in my mind whether or not I was going to reveal my own childhood sexual abuse by a survivor in my family. And it really was, I think, because, again, of the support that I had in the team, but also the agency I had to feel like I was in control of whether or not I was going to do that. That was something that was a question throughout, for sure.
John, you've said several times, as you said tonight, that you think you're probably stepping back from gun violence reporting for a while, or at least gun violence and kids for a while. We'll see. But that gives me a wonderful opportunity to exploit you and say, since you are allegedly stepping back, what do you now think of as the most underreported terrain? What do you wish other reporters would pick up where you've left off, or just where it needs to go? What's one direction the story hasn't gone that it needs to go, or what's one area where the story of the impact of gun violence could go deeper to have bigger impact? If you were now somebody's editor and saying, going out and do it.
That list is long. the sort of the broadest answer, and and I've preached this for years, and I still think there isn't enough of it, is telling stories through the eyes of children. In some ways, I've always viewed writing about gun violence through kids' eyes as a Trojan horse to get people to care about gun violence at all. Because there is an age, and I've seen it literally in the metrics of the stories that I've written, where you can see when the victim blaming starts, when they look at someone and say, well, this was his fault that he got shot. He was in the wrong place. He was probably in a gang, right? You can see there's that moment. And it's hard to blame a 4-year-old in Cleveland, Ohio, for getting shot in the head, right, in a road rage incident. But I still read so many stories that are about children and about gun violence affecting children, where the children are one-dimensional. Mm-hmm. They are not deeply explored, and I think it's because there's often a reluctance among reporters to just go there, or maybe a distrust, or what am I really going to get from this kid, or and often it's that first conversation can be pretty flat. It's not always that way, but often it can be. But I've always found with kids, you go back the second time, and you're suddenly this familiar person in their life, and then they're ready to go. So, it's not that is an area that I still think. I mean, we write about school shootings all the time, and who's quoted in those stories? I mean, it is almost always the teacher, the police officer who responded, the superintendent. And the eye-opening moment for me around school shootings was going to a school shooting that no one remembered in South Carolina, where one child died, and finding hundreds of victims, children who were fundamentally changed by a shooting that lasted a matter of seconds, and they were all different. And it was like, God, as a country, we're blind to this. So the scope of it still is something I don't think, as journalists, that we've really gotten a handle on. But I think that idea especially is give children agency, let them tell their stories.
Thanks. Go for it. Be a good journalist.
I'll be the first. Just first of all, thank you all so much. It's really brave work that you've all done, and I have a lot of questions, but I guess there's sort of a two-part question. It's, did you do anything to prepare your audience for what you were about to tell them about? These difficult subjects that people, want to turn away from. Was there any sort of editor's note, or how did you, or even if people start to feel something, if they get triggered, or they they want to put it away or not confront it, was there anything to do to help your audience with that? And then what was kind of the response, I guess?
Yeah, no, that's a real question. I think there's a couple dimensions. One is, did any of you use content warnings? What was the conversation about that on your teams like? But how did you take care of your readers and listeners and viewers and downloaders? There are lots of different ways of taking care of readers. So any thoughts on that? Anyone want to jump in, Connie?
Yeah, sure. We did have a content warning at the beginning of every episode that this episode deals with sexual violence, so that people were aware before listening. But this that question made me think of episode 4 of our podcast, which is primarily just survivors' voices in their own words, remembering their experiences as children in this school. And it was very, very difficult to produce because I feel like there's this tension between wanting to respect the truth that the survivors told us in terms of what they went through at this school as children versus what can our listeners handle? What can an audience listen to? And that was something I think that we all as a team grappled with for a really long time because these are such difficult stories, such difficult truths. And we felt a responsibility to the survivors to accurately reflect their experiences, but also we wanted to make it something that people could listen to, and that was really, really hard. And I think I'd be interested in how other people have grappled with that, because I feel like this is something that probably everyone has dealt with.
Any other did you think about that question? How you take care of folks?
Yeah, I mean, we did not have a content warning, but what we did dial back some of the violence, some of the abuse, and we had more details, but all of us had the same sense at some point that it was too much. Like the editors we all were like, we don't really need, like we've shown what we need to show. We don't need to, so we took some stuff out. But I think the other thing that we really wanted to leave readers with, which we thought was really important, was hope. And so in some of the final chapters, well, one of the second to last chapters in that story is Angelica Belen in prison today. And I mean, she is just a beacon of light. And it's crazy. I mean, she's been in prison for half of her, she was sentenced to 18 years. She's been in about 10 now. And, she said prison saved her life, and she's been through a ton of therapy, and she's in a good spot. She's helping other women in prison now. And so there is hope. I mean, so the hopefulness, I think, was really important, and we wanted to make sure that that was included.
Yeah. John Barth, and we should say that John was one of this year's Dart Award judges, for better or worse.
No, it's really terrific. So I wanted to play off of that, Raquel. Good lead up. What have you all learned about resilience? We hear about that a lot in trauma. What have you witnessed? What should we know about resilience?
Yeah, I mean, well, so Angelica Belen is one of those women who, she's just a huge inspiration. Her resilience is remarkable, and her sister as well. Both of them. Her sister has 5 children and lives in Iowa, and I interviewed her at their home. And I mean, I just learned about abuse is super complex and not what we think it is, and I didn't know that much about it. I don't come from a family with abuse, and I had a lot of preconceived ideas about what I might be like if someone had done these things to me. And so Angelica Belen is still in touch with the foster family that, made her kneel on her knees overnight in the corner with hangers on her arms. I mean, she's still in touch with them. And for me, that was so hard to understand how that is. A super learning curve for me on what abuse is like. So it was good. It just changes the way that I think about when I'm reporting and seeking the truth. It's like not always what I would do is not how somebody else might act. And so that kind of digresses from resilience, but those 2 women, those sisters, are so resilient. It was.
Now, how did you come to think about this idea? Because you're dealing with someone who had enormous reserves of injury and enormous reserves of coping, and
I think for Kate, the resilience sort of came through this search that she wanted these answers, and she's now an academic. She's a scientist. The way she views the world is about compiling the facts, getting the data. Like, how do I get the pieces and make sense of it all? And so she took that same approach to her story. And I think there's an extraordinary resiliency in that, in finding that, the thing that drives you and applying that to your own trauma.
And I think one of the things I know I, as a journalist, have learned from my Dart Center colleagues who are clinicians and other trauma experts is often the importance of the survivor mission, of the person who undertakes a particular kind of work or particular line of helping other survivors or even telling their own story. And I will just say, again, to those of you who are early in your careers here, that when you find that source who has a powerful survivor mission, you're lucky, because that's someone who has found a way of coping that is about others and not just themselves, and they're much more likely to cooperate with you. We have time, I think, for one more, so go for it.
Hi, I'm Eric. I'm a local freelance journalist. Thank you for all your work. I, like probably everyone here, has been following the coverage of the war in Israel and Gaza, and there's obviously been so many horrific photos and videos and print stories already, and but I feel like people are already so dug into their views, and I feel like the longer this goes on and escalates, people, there's a risk of people becoming numb to the stories. And so I wondered what ideas you have for ways to cut through that and to, just to cut through that as journalists.
quick thoughts on how your own work you've thought about cutting through numbness? John, maybe that's for you.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah, I mean, that's a perpetual problem, right? When you're writing about gun violence is people, there's so much to overcome to get somebody to click on one of those stories. And it sort of goes back to my last comment about depicting people in full. You know, I think we as humans want to read deeply human stories. We want to see other people in ourselves, and that has always been sort of my goal is if I'm telling a story from a part of Washington, D.C., you know, and if I'm in Southeast D.C., I want people in Northwest D.C. who've never driven across the river to see themselves as their own children in that kid. And again, it just requires a lot of reporting. But we've seen, I mean, I know that the stories that have resonated, it's when you can tell that deeply, deeply human story. That's true of every piece up here, right? That's why these pieces resonated, is because they weren't shallow. They went deep. And I think that the best reporting, the most memorable reporting I can think of from the past week were stories that were not just about horror. It was somebody who you've told me who they were, then I care. I care about the consequences. I care about the loss. You know, you have to give people a reason to care beyond just look at this awful thing. You have to make that person real.
Yeah. Looks like we have 2 more questions. I'll tell you what, each of you quickly ask your question, both in succession. We'll pitch them to the panel and see how we end it. And then we need to let our wonderful colleagues in the facilities department here do their jobs too. So go for it.
Thank you for the opportunity. My name is Patience Nyange. I come from Kenya and I represent the Association of Media Women in Kenya. My question is to any of you who feels like they can answer this question. If you want, knowing what you know now, and of course, based on the impact that your stories have had, if you were to do this story again afresh today, what else will you change in your stories?
That's all right. So if you do your story again, what's something you might do differently? Yep. And quickly?
Yes. I'm curious what you all have felt throughout this process, these particular stories, about what you owe to your sources. I feel like there's a lot of journalism conventions about where boundaries are, and those are there for good reason, but it feels like with these stories it's different, and how do you manage those relationships and take care of people while also being professional?
All right, so 2 really great questions. What's something you might do differently after these particular projects and beats? And how do you think about relationships with sources? Who wants to take question 1? Something you do differently. Anybody? Go.
Yeah. I think one of the things that Rachel and I struggled with throughout this project that we did, it took us 3 years, and pretty quickly, I would say within the first year, we were starting to hear stories of abuse at this facility, and we grappled with, do we keep reporting and try to get this story into the biggest possible national outlet in hopes that people pay attention to it, or do we get this information out into the world as soon as possible? And I'm not saying that I wish we had done it differently, but I think if I were to pick a different path, we would have published something in year 1 and maybe not had it in the New York Times and maybe not have talked to as many people, but gotten some of this information out more quickly. I think that's one of those ethical questions that I still grapple with, is like, we did it as quickly as we possibly could, but was it fast enough?
Well, and I would also say that sometimes there's tactical benefit to pushing a piece of a story out because it may shake other sources loose. So it's not always a zero-sum choice, right? And that other question. Sources.
You know, it's not you don't get to normally work with a source for 10 years whose husband works with you at the Globe. So that was unique. And yet, Kate's familiarity with journalism, her trust in my ability to report it out. Somewhere back in 2013, 2014, we did a little panel discussion about our work, which I was like sitting there like, you know, I didn't have anything yet. There wasn't really a story there. And she said, well, Janelle's gonna go find out what she's gonna find, and if she finds out things that are wrong, then that's her job, and that's not my job. And so it was this dual path that we had in the story. But it also, you know, over a 10-year process, you just start texting with someone, and I say it in the story, but she texted me once during dinner and said, we should really find this pedophile in prison by my house, and I was like, I'm eating dinner, there's a connection there where you're just, I'm with my kids, the story took on a life of its own, and the relationship did too, and I think it's been interesting because once it's out there in the world, it becomes bigger. It was like our world, the two of us, for so long. And once it was out there, it's like, oh, there's other, we kind of both looked up and said, oh, this is something bigger than us now.
Yeah. All right. Can we thank all our panelists again? I want to point out that it's 8 o'clock. It's half an hour after we said we were going to stop, and yet we have a full house who stayed, and it's because of the incredibly compelling work and the compelling speakers we have. If you have not already, you should visit the Dart Center website, www.dartcenter.org, where you will find a massive library of tip sheets and backgrounders and resources for journalists and researchers and many others. You'll find every Dart Award-winning story since 1994 and lessons learned from them and most of the event videos. You will also find a little button on the page that allows you, should you choose to donate to support the work of the Dart Center for Journalism and Trauma. Thanks again to all of our winners for their work, for their contributions tonight. Keep doing it. See you all soon.